Episode 8. The office opened. Nell Harrow. The fire alarm in a hotel is one of the most democratic sounds in the world. It does not care whether you are haunted, grieving, half-dressed, or trying to stop a supernatural filing system from moving into your professional life. It simply insists. A hard, relentless electronic scream filled the corridor, bounced off the wallpaper, and turned every sleeping guest into a future complaint. Elise swore once decisively and snapped into management mode so fast it was almost beautiful. "Right," she said. "Everyone out. No lifts. Grab keys, coats, medication if it's in reach. Leave everything else." Margaret looked at her. That was competent. "Don't sound surprised." "I'm not, merely irritated by timing." "Fair." Guest doors were opening all along the corridor now. Men in t-shirts, women in dressing gowns, one teenager with headphones still on. A child crying in room 10 because of course there was a real child on the floor too, because the universe enjoys administrative irony. The corridor had gone back to looking like a corridor. No child at the far end, no archive light under 14. Just alarm, confusion, and the smell of overheated wiring that may or may not have been real. That was almost worse. When these things hide inside ordinary emergencies, they become harder to fight because everyone else starts helping them by behaving sensibly. David was still staring at room 14. I grabbed his sleeve. "Move." He looked at me as if from a distance, then nodded once. Good enough. Margaret slammed room 14 shut and turned the key in the lock. Not because she thought that would solve anything, because procedure matters even when it's losing. She handed the key to Elise. "Do not let anyone back on this floor tonight." Elise gave her a look. "I wasn't planning to offer midnight tours." We started moving guests toward the stairs. No one likes being herded in Britain, even on fire, especially on fire. A man from room 8 wanted to know whether this was a drill. A woman from room 18 wanted her handbag. Frank from 12 kept saying, "There was a boy," in the tone of a man already planning to complain to someone in authority if he survived the evening. Elise handled them all with the cold efficiency of a woman whose patients had left the building years ago and never sent a postcard. I stayed near David, not because I trusted him less, because I trusted the pull on him more. He was walking, but with that same slight wrongness I'd seen in the house. Not reluctant, not dazed, just listening around the edges. At the top of the stairs, he stopped dead. I nearly walked into him. "What?" He looked down toward reception. The alarm still screamed. Guests were pushing past us. Margaret turned. "Why have you stopped?" David's face had gone pale again. "The building's sorting by exit." I stared at him. "English." He pointed. "Front exit is being read as witness flow. Rear service exit as threshold." That landed badly. Because of course it did. A hotel evacuation. People moving through doors. Bodies sorted by route. Elise looked from him to the stairs. "You're telling me the fire exits are haunted?" "No," David said. "I'm telling you they're being used." Margaret swore. "Split them." Elise blinked. "What?" "Split the guests, half front, half rear. Randomly. Break the pattern." That made horrible sense. I said, "Can we actually do that without causing a riot?" Elise gave me a flat look. "Watch me." She pushed past us, planted herself halfway down the stairs like an angry sergeant major, and started directing guests with the kind of authority only hotel managers and school dinner ladies truly possess. "Front exit for rooms 1 to 9. Rear service exit for 10 to 18. No, I don't care if your husband's downstairs already. He can survive 30 seconds without you. Keep moving." It worked. Not gracefully, but enough. Margaret leaned close to David. "Can you still feel the indexing?" He nodded once. "Less." "Good. Keep it that way." He looked at her. "How?" By remaining annoyed. That nearly made me laugh. "Nearly. We got everyone downstairs and out into the car park under cold night air and flashing alarm lights. Guests clustered in coats and pyjamas, smoking, shivering, complaining, counting children, checking phones. The usual choreography of minor British disaster. Only this one had a dead records office in room 14 and a child in blue pyjamas trying to sort occupancy. Elise did a head count with one of the night staff, who looked as if he was reconsidering every career choice that had led him to hospitality. Margaret stood apart from the crowd, smoking into the dark like a woman trying to poison history by increments. David and I ended up by the low wall near the bins. Romantic if you lowered your standards enough. He looked dreadful. I said, "Sit down." "No." David, "No. You're going to fall over." "Then I'll do it standing." That was so him I didn't argue further. For a moment we just stood there with the alarm screaming behind us and guests muttering around us and the night carrying on, as if all of this were merely weather. Then he said, "HVP." I looked at him. "What about it?" He rubbed his marked hand once against his coat. When the voice read it out, it didn't sound like a place. "It's a company." "Yes," he said. "That's my point." I waited. He looked at me then, properly. "No, it's not moving into a building, it's moving into a structure." That landed. Not because it was surprising, because it was worse. The office did not need old walls and hidden rooms anymore. It needed continuity, records, access, names, authority, systems that outlived the people inside them. A business was perfect. I said, "You think it can use the company the way it used the house?" "No," he said, "better." I hated how quickly that made sense. Margaret joined us, smoke still clinging to her coat. "He's right." I looked at her. "Can we have one useful variation tonight where someone is wrong?" "No." "Fair." Elise came over, still carrying the rooming list and a face like murder. "Everyone's out. Fire brigade's on the way. I've told them it's an electrical fault on the second floor." Margaret nodded. "Good." Elise looked between us. "Now what?" No one answered immediately, because the next step was obvious and awful, and I said it anyway. "We need to get to HVP." Elise stared. "Tonight?" "Yes." "No." I turned to her. "It's already started." "That's exactly why you don't go walking into another active site at nearly 9 o'clock at night," David said quietly. "She's right." I looked at him. He went on. "If it's adapting to business continuity, then going there physically may be the equivalent of walking back into the house." Margaret nodded once. "Yes," I said. "So what? We sit in a car park and let it set up a branch office?" Elise muttered, "That phrase can absolutely get in the sea." Margaret ignored her. "We need to know what form the business takes in record before we approach it." I stared at her. "In English?" "In English, we need to know whether it's using the company as a threshold site, a witness site, or a review site." David answered before I could. "Threshold." Margaret looked at him. "You're sure?" He nodded. "Yes." "How?" He looked down at his hand. "Because it read the entity as viable." That meant something to them. I could tell. I said, "Meaning?" Margaret answered, "Meaning the business has enough structure, enough continuity, and enough lawful identity to hold process." I felt sick. HVP security shutters, contracts, invoices, keys, access, site visits, security assessments, locked premises, entry points, barriers, signatures. Of course it did. David said, "And because it's a shutters company, it's even cleaner." I looked at him. "What?" He met my eyes. "It's a business built around controlled entry." That was so offensively perfect I wanted to punch the moon. Elise said, "No, absolutely not. That is ridiculous." Margaret lit another cigarette. "Yes," she said, "and still true." The fire alarm finally cut off. The sudden silence felt wrong. Guests kept muttering. Somebody coughed. A child asked whether the hotel was broken. No one answered him. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. All three of us looked at it. He did not move. I said, "Don't." He nodded. "I wasn't going to." Then it buzzed again. And again, not a call. Messages. He took it out slowly. The screen was lit with email notifications. Not personal, work. He stared at them. I said, "What?" His face changed in a way I did not like at all. "What is it?" Elise snapped. He turned the screen toward us. 3 new emails. All time-stamped within the last minute. All from internal company addresses that should not have been active at this hour. Subjects: Site access review. Continuity escalation. Threshold correction required. No one spoke. David opened the first one. Blank body. 1 attachment. HVP_map_final.pdf. The second, blank body. Attachment. Occupancy_exception_log.xlsx. The third, blank body. No attachment. Just 1 line in the preview pane. Please attend the premises to complete review. Elise said, no. Margaret said, do not open anything. David hadn't yet. Good. Then his phone buzzed once more. A calendar invite this time. He stared at it. I said, tell me that's not what I think it is. He looked at me. It's a meeting request. From who? His mouth tightened. From HVP security shutters. I took the phone from him before he could object. The invite title read, Continuity Review, Witness/Threshold Alignment. Time, tonight, 2100. Location, main office. Attendees, Eleanor Harrow, David Harrow. Elise Omant, Margaret swore. Elise said, I'm sorry, why am I invited to my own nightmare? David looked at the screen, then at me, then said, with the exhausted clarity of a man finally understanding the shape of the trap, it's not asking us to come. He paused. Then, it's minuting the meeting before it happens. And somewhere behind us, from the dark second-floor window of room 14, a child's hand tapped 3 times on the glass. No one said anything for a moment after that. The second-floor window of room 14 had gone dark again. No hand. No child, just black glass reflecting the car park lights and a cluster of irritated hotel guests trying to decide whether they were cold enough to demand compensation. The phone in my hand still showed the meeting invite. Continuity review, witness/threshold alignment, 2100, main office, minuted before it happened. That was the part I couldn't get past. Not the supernatural element, not even the use of the company. The confidence, the assumption that process would continue because process always does. Margaret took the phone from me and looked at the screen without touching anything else. Do not accept, do not decline, do not propose a new time. Elise stared at her. Was that genuinely a concern? Yes, Margaret said. Never negotiate with a calendar event raised by the dead. That was such a hideous sentence I almost admired it. David took the phone back and locked the screen. Thank you, I'll add that to my general life guidance. He sounded steadier now. Not well, but steadier. That worried me. Sometimes people look strongest just before they become useful to the wrong thing. I said, can it actually use email and calendar systems, or is this just theatre? Margaret lit another cigarette. It can use any structure that records attendance, authority, sequence, and consent. David nodded once, which is basically all office software. I looked at him. You're taking this disturbingly well. No, he said. I'm categorizing because panic is less efficient. That was the most David sentence ever spoken by a man standing outside a hotel being audited by the dead. Elise folded her arms. So what's the plan? Because I'd love one. No one answered immediately, because there were only bad options, and bad options always take a second to introduce themselves properly. I said, we go to the office. Margaret said, no. David said at the same time, not yet. I looked between them. Why not? David answered first, because if the meeting has already been minuted, then physically attending may simply complete what the system expects. Margaret nodded. Yes. I said, and if we don't go? Margaret exhaled smoke into the cold. Then it may proceed by proxy. Elise threw both hands up. Excellent. So if we go, we're trapped, and if we don't go, we're represented. Love that. Fair. David looked at the dark hotel window. It's not asking for bodies, it's asking for roles. That landed. Witness. Threshold. Harrow. Business continuity. Attendance as function, not person. I said, then how do we stop it? Margaret looked at me. We interrupt the record before the meeting time. By doing what? She was quiet for a moment. Then, by finding out what the company looks like from its side. I stared at her. In English, we need to know which parts of the business it has already claimed. That made unpleasant sense. David said, emails, obviously. Not just emails, Margaret said. Think like a system. He did. You could see it happen. The underwriter's brain again. Sorting risk. Mapping process. Shared drives, he said. Access logs, alarm codes, site schedules, staff hierarchy, job sheets, call-outs, lock-up procedures. He looked at me. And anything involving authorised entry. Of course, security shutters, controlled access, opening and closing, permitted movement through barriers. The office had found a modern religion, and it was operations. Elise said, "Can we check any of that without going there?" David was already shaking his head. Some, not enough. I looked at him. How much access do you have? He gave me a tired look. It's my company. I blinked, then corrected myself. How much access do you have right now? That changed his face, not because he hadn't thought of it, because he had. He took out his phone again. I can check whether the systems still recognize me, Margaret said, carefully. Meaning? Meaning you do not click anything that says confirm, accept, review, continue, or sign. David looked at her. You really think I need that level of instruction? She gave him a flat stare. You picked up the pen. Fair. He unlocked the phone and opened his work email first. No one breathed properly. He didn't touch the attachments. Good. Then he opened the company portal app. The loading wheel turned once, twice. Then the dashboard appeared, normal enough at first glance. Company logo, site list, open jobs, engineer notes, access requests. Then David's expression changed. What? He turned the screen so we could see. At the top of the dashboard, where it should have said pending access requests, it now said pending threshold requests. Below that, unresolved occupancy. Exceptions, 3. And under the staff list, a new department had appeared. Continuity. Elise stared. No, David scrolled. The department had 3 assigned roles. Witness, unconfirmed. Threshold, pending correction. Review signatory, D. Harrow. My stomach dropped. Margaret said very quietly, do not scroll further. David stopped. Why? Because if it has started naming roles inside the live system, deeper access may count as acceptance. He looked at the screen, then locked it at once. Good. I said, so it's already in? Margaret nodded. Yes. Elise looked physically offended. How can a haunting have a department? David said, badly apparently. That nearly helped. Nearly. I said, can we shut the system down? David thought about it. Possibly. Margaret said, no. He looked at her. No. If you shut a structure down while it's mid-transfer, it doesn't vanish. It reroutes. To what? I didn't ask, because I already knew the answer would be something worse. Elise said it anyway. To where? Margaret looked at the hotel, then at me. Wherever continuity still exists. No one liked that. David leaned against the low wall and rubbed his face with his clean hand. Then we need a controlled interruption, not a crash. I looked at him. What does that mean? He answered immediately now, fully in work mode. It means we identify the specific process it's trying to complete and break one required dependency. Margaret's mouth twitched. That is the most attractive thing anyone has said tonight. David stared at her. I'm not taking that as a compliment. Wise, I said. Required dependency. He nodded. If this thing is using business logic, then it still needs sequence, access, attendees, records, probably a location anchor. Elise frowned. So if one of those fails, it can't complete cleanly. Margaret said, exactly. I looked between them. Right, good. So what's the weakest point? David answered too quickly. Me. Silence. Then Elise said, well, that's bleak. He didn't react, because he was right. Review signatory, D. Harrow. Assigned hand, the one that signs. I said no. He looked at me. Yes. Margaret nodded once. Unfortunately. I hated both of them for that. David went on. If I'm the signatory, then the meeting can't complete without my hand, my access, or my consent being represented somehow. Margaret said, unless it already has enough of you. He looked at his marked hand. That's what I'm worried about. I said, can we strip it? Margaret was quiet. Then, maybe. That was the first maybe I'd heard from her that sounded like hope rather than delay. I said, how? She looked at David. Not here. Elise threw up her hands again. Brilliant. Love a mystery. Margaret ignored her. The mark on the hand is transfer ink. It ties him to active record. If we can identify what specific document or authority it attached to, we may be able to interrupt the assignment before 9. David frowned. How? Margaret looked at him. By finding the original counterpart. I said that meant something to him before it meant anything to me. I saw it happen. His expression sharpened. The pen. Yes. And the box. Yes. And whatever document was on top. Margaret nodded. The active document, I said. The death certificate? David shook his head. No. The marriage certificate? He looked at me. Maybe. But I don't think that was the top document. I stared. You just said the pen was on the death certificate. Yes, he said. On top of that stack, not on top of the file. That was different. Important, apparently. Margaret said, what was under the stack? David frowned hard now, dragging memory back through shock. I didn't read it properly. Try. He shut his eyes. The car park noise carried on around us. Guests muttering. A fire engine arriving at last. Someone asking Elise whether they'd get a refund. The ordinary world continuing to be offensively itself. Then David opened his eyes. There was a folder underneath. Green. I felt something cold move through me. Green. The station locker. HVP/final continuity, David went on. Typed label. I only saw part of it when the papers shifted. What part? He looked at me. HVP/site transfer authority. No one spoke. Because there it was. Not just the business being used, the business being prepared. Site transfer authority. Threshold logic in a security company. Modern, clean, lawful. Elise said, I'm going to be sick. Reasonable. Margaret looked at David. Then that's the dependency, I said. Meaning? She answered. If the office is using HVP as a threshold site, it needs site transfer authority to complete review. David nodded slowly. And if we stop that document, it can't formalise the premises. I looked at both of them. So we do need to go there, Margaret said, eventually. I was starting to lose patience with eventually. When? She checked her watch. Before 9, not now. That is not a useful distinction. It is if you want to arrive before the meeting and not as part of it. That, annoyingly, made sense. Elise looked toward the hotel entrance where the fire brigade were now talking to her night porter. I can't leave yet. I turned to her. Yes, you can. No, I literally run this place. Margaret said, she stays. I looked at her. No. Yes. Why? Because if the office has already tried to correct through Elise, bringing her to an active threshold site may complete what the house failed to do. That shut me up. Elise looked stricken and furious at once. I hate that this is sensible, David said quietly. She's right. I looked at him. He went on. If the invite named all three of us, then splitting the group may be the only way to stop it getting full attendance. That landed. No full attendance. No clean meeting. No easy completion. Margaret nodded. Exactly. I said, so who goes? Margaret looked at David's hand, then at me, then said, the witness and the signatory. I stared at her. No. David said at the same time, absolutely not. Margaret lit another cigarette. Then I suggest one of you invent a better structure in the next 19 minutes. And David's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an email. It was a push notification from the company alarm app. Main office unlocked. No authorized user listed, just one line beneath it, entry granted. For 1 second after the notification appeared, nobody spoke. Then Elise said with exhausted precision, no. Not dramatic, not frightened. Just the flat refusal of a woman who had reached her daily limit for impossible admin and found the universe trying to hand her overtime. David looked at the phone, then at Margaret, then at me. Main office unlocked. Yes, I said. I can read. That wasn't for your benefit. Fair. Margaret took the phone, read the notification herself, then handed it back without touching anything else. Still no authorized user listed, David checked. No. That mattered. I could tell by her face. I said, why? Because if a recognized user had opened it, we'd be dealing with access. This is worse. In English. This is invitation. Right. Good. Excellent. The fire brigade had gone into the hotel now. Guests were beginning to cluster in little islands of complaint and cigarette smoke. The ordinary world was already trying to flatten the night into an inconvenience. I envied it. Elise looked between us. So we're really doing this? Margaret nodded once. Yes. Elise swore under her breath. Then, because she was still herself, said, fine, then we do it properly. She turned to me. You don't go alone. I wasn't planning to. You don't let him touch anything. She jerked her chin toward David. He looked offended. I'm standing here. Yes, Elise said. That's why I said it where you could hear. Reasonable. Then she looked at Margaret. And if this gets worse, you pull them out. Margaret's face did not change. If I can. Elise stared. That is not reassuring. No, Margaret said. It's accurate. David locked his phone and put it away. We're wasting time. I looked at him. You're in no state to be brisk. And yet here we are. Also fair. Margaret checked her watch again. 17 minutes. I said, to get there? To arrive before the meeting formalizes. I hated that sentence. Elise grabbed my arm before I could move. Nell. I looked at her. For a second, all the management steel dropped out of her face and she was just my sister again. Tired, angry, trying not to look frightened because fear in our family had always been treated like something to be managed privately. If it starts trying to place you, she said, leave. I nodded. If it starts trying to place David, she added, hit him. David looked at her. I'm touched. You shouldn't be. That almost helped. Almost. Margaret said, enough. And that was that. We left Elise in the hotel car park with the fire brigade, the guests, and a building that had just tried to become overflow record storage. It felt wrong leaving her there. Everything felt wrong by then. David drove. Not because I wanted him to, because he insisted. And because there are times when arguing with a man who has just been assigned by the dead is less useful than watching him very closely from the passenger seat. Margaret got in the back again, carrying her canvas case like a woman who had packed for the end of the world years ago and was annoyed it had finally arrived. Peterborough slid past in sodium light and wet reflections, retail parks, closed units, roundabouts, traffic lights changing for no one, a kebab wrapper skidding across a side road, the ordinary city at night, trying very hard not to know what was moving through it. David drove too carefully. That was how I knew he was rattled. When he was angry, he drove clean and hard. When he was frightened, he became meticulous. I said, how bad is it? He kept his eyes on the road. Which part? Your hand. He was quiet for a second. Then, it feels anticipated. I turned to look at him. That's not a real sensation. No, he said. And yet. Margaret leaned forward slightly from the back. Does it pull only when you're near active record, or all the time? David considered that. Stronger near structure. Meaning? Doors, systems, lists, anything with authorised access. I looked out of the window. Of course the office had chosen a man whose entire professional life was built around controlled entry and procedural certainty. I said, can you still tell what it's doing? Some of it. Enough to help? He gave a short breath that might have been a laugh in a better life. That depends whether you consider being an unwilling antenna helpful. Margaret said, tonight, yes. He didn't answer. We turned onto the industrial estate road, the sort of place that looks temporary even after 20 years. Units with roller shutters, security fencing, sodium lamps, company signs half lit, pallets stacked in corners, vans sleeping in rows. HVP sat 3 units down from the bend, dark frontage. Main sign above the office block. Roller shutter down over the warehouse entrance, front office lights on. That was wrong already. No one should have been there. David slowed but didn't stop immediately. The barrier gate at the front stood open. I looked at it. Was that locked? Yes, he said. Alarmed? Yes. Can you tell if anyone's inside? He looked at the office windows. No. Margaret said, don't park directly in front. I was beginning to think she had a rule for every possible route into hell. David pulled into the side bay instead, half shadowed by a transit van. We sat there for 1 second too long looking at the building. Ordinary office frontage, reception window, frosted glass door, company logo. The sort of place where people discuss invoices, site visits, and whether anyone's ordered more tea bags. Tonight it looked like a trap wearing business casual. I said, what now? Margaret answered immediately. Observe first. David was already staring at the building with that wrong concentration again. I said, what do you feel? He didn't answer at once, then, hierarchy. That made my skin crawl. In English. It's arranged. No better. He looked at the office block. Reception is witness-facing. Then toward the warehouse shutter. Warehouse is threshold. Then at the upstairs windows. And upstairs admin is review. I stared at him. You can tell that from the car? No, he said. I can tell because it wants me to know. That was worse. Much worse. Margaret took out the wrapped hand mirror and passed it between the seats. To Nell. I took it. What for? If the reception glass starts reflecting a room that isn't there, do not trust the first door you see. I looked at her. You really save your best sentences for the worst moments. Yes, she said. Use the mirror. David killed the engine. The silence after the car stopped felt enormous. No hotel alarm now, no guests, no easy human noise, just the faint hum of estate lighting and the tick of the cooling engine. Then David's work phone buzzed again. He took it out, 1 new notification. From the company alarm app. Zone 1 acknowledged, reception ready. No one spoke. Then another. Zone 2 pending. Warehouse awaiting threshold. Then a third. Zone 3 pending. Review signatory not present. David locked the phone so hard I thought he might crack it. Margaret said, good. I turned on her. How is any of this good? Because it still needs him physically enough to complain. That was infuriatingly true. I said, can it fake his presence? Possibly later. Not yet. David opened the car door. I grabbed his sleeve. No. He looked at me. We don't have time. You don't go first. He stared for half a second. Then, because the universe enjoys humiliating me, nodded once. Fine. I got out first. Cold air. Wet tarmac. Smell of metal, old rain and industrial dust. Margaret came round from the back, canvas case in one hand. David stood by the car, pale under the estate lights, looking at the office as if it had personally insulted him. We crossed the bay together. The front office windows reflected us properly at first. 3 figures approaching. Then not properly. For one step, just one, the glass showed 4. A child walking between me and David. I stopped dead. Margaret said, "Mirror." I raised it. The reflection corrected at once. 3 figures only. "No child." I said, "He's here." Margaret nodded. "Yes." David looked at the glass. "I can't see him." "That doesn't mean he isn't using the frontage." We reached the front door. Frosted glass, company logo, keypad entry, standard office mat with mud marks from actual human boots. Ordinary. Except the keypad was lit green. Entry granted. No code needed. David looked at it and went still. "What?" He swallowed. "It's already accepted me." Margaret said, "Then you do not touch the handle." I looked at the door. "Can it open without him?" "Yes," Margaret said, "but if he opens it, that may count as attendance." David took one step back. "Good." I reached for the handle. The reception lights inside flickered once, then steadied, and from somewhere beyond the frosted glass, in a woman's voice I knew at once and hated for it, came the words, "Welcome back, Eleanor." Helen. Not in the house now, not in the hotel. In the office. Of course. Margaret's face hardened. She's moved faster than I expected. I kept my hand off the handle. Can she do that? Margaret looked at the building. She doesn't need to move, only to be where the record is active. That was not comforting, David said very quietly. There's someone in reception. I looked at him. How do you know? He stared through the frosted glass. Because they're waiting for us to sign in. And on the other side of the door, something slid slowly across a desk. A visitor log. No one touched the door. That mattered. Not morally, not symbolically. Practically, the keypad was green. The office had already granted entry. That did not mean we had to accept the terms. On the other side of the frosted glass, something had slid across the reception desk. A visitor log. Of course it had. No Haunted Abbey nonsense. No blood on walls. No melodrama. Just a sign-in process. I said, if I ever survive this, I'm never filling out another visitor's book as long as I live. Margaret said, sensibly. David was still staring through the glass. There's someone sitting behind the desk. I looked at him. Who? He didn't answer immediately. Then, I don't know. That frightened me more than if he'd named Helen. Not knowing meant the office had started generating function before identity. I raised the mirror and angled it toward the reception door. The frosted panel changed. Not fully. Not like magic in a cheap film. Just enough. For a second, the reception beyond looked sharper through the mirror than through the glass itself. Desk, chairs, brochure rack. The wall clock that always ran 3 minutes slow because no one could be bothered to fix it. And behind the desk sat a woman in a dark cardigan with her hands folded over a ledger. Not Helen. Not exactly. Older than the receptionist we actually had. Thinner. Hair pinned back. Face indistinct in the mirror, as though the office had built a person out of role before it had settled on features. I lowered the mirror. Receptionist. Margaret nodded once. Yes. David looked at me. You saw her? Enough. He rubbed his marked hand against his coat again. It's trying to formalise front of house. That phrase made my skin crawl. Margaret took the wax pencil from her case and drew a short mark on the lower corner of the glass beside the frame. A simple diagonal line. What's that? An objection? I stared at her. You can object to a door. You can object to anything if it's still pretending to be lawful. That was appalling. Also, apparently useful. She stepped back. Now open it. Not him, you. I looked at the handle. Why me? Because the witness may enter a reception without being counted if she refuses the record. I hated that sentence almost as much as I understood it. I took the handle and pushed. The door opened inward with ordinary office resistance, rubber seal, hinge drag, the smell of stale heating and printer dust. Reception lights hummed overhead. The desk sat exactly where it always had. So did the visitor chair, The brochure stand, the stack of old trade magazines no one ever read, and behind the desk sat no one. Empty chair, computer screen dark, phone cradle in place, visitor log open on the counter. I said, "Right." David stayed on the threshold. Good. Margaret came in behind me, but only one pace. The air inside felt wrong in the way offices feel wrong after hours anyway. Too still, too aware of their own paperwork. The visitor log lay open to a fresh page. 3 lines already written. Eleanor Harrow, witness. David Harrow, review signatory. Elise Omant, threshold, pending. No handwriting I recognised, no pen visible. I stepped back from it at once. Margaret said, "Do not read below the fold." I looked at her. Why? Because if there are signature fields lower down, your eye may count as review. I stared. That is absurd. Yes, she said, and still avoid it. David from the doorway said quietly, "There's another page underneath." I looked at him. How can you tell? He didn't blink. Because it's waiting. That was enough of that. I said, "Where's the Site Transfer Authority file?" Margaret looked past reception toward the inner office corridor. Not here. David nodded once. Upstairs or warehouse. I turned. The reception corridor led to the usual places. Small accounts office on the left, meeting room on the right, stairs at the back up to admin, fire door through to warehouse access. Ordinary layout. Except the wall clock behind the desk now read 20:53. I checked my phone. 20:46. I showed Margaret. She didn't look surprised. Reception is ahead. In time? Yes. Can it do that? It already has. Wonderful. David said, "Then we don't stay in reception." "No," Margaret agreed. "We don't." I took one step toward the inner corridor. The reception phone rang. All 3 of us stopped. One ring only. Then silence. Then the computer monitor on the desk flickered on by itself. No desktop, no login screen, just a pale green form with 3 fields. Name, purpose of visit, authorizing party. I looked away at once. Margaret said, "Do not answer administrative questions in active space unless you enjoy becoming one." I said, "You really do save these for the right moments." Yes. David was still on the threshold. I turned to him. "Can you feel where it's strongest?" He closed his eyes briefly. Not theatrically, like a man checking pressure in a bad joint. "Warehouse," he said. "But the file's upstairs." Margaret looked at him sharply. "You're sure?" "Yes." "How?" He opened his eyes. "The warehouse is where it wants threshold. Upstairs is where it wants authority." That made sense in the worst possible way. Reception to witness, warehouse to threshold, upstairs admin to review, modern office, same old machine. I said, "Then we go upstairs." Margaret shook her head. "No, not directly." "Why not?" "Because if review is already active, taking the stairs may count as escalation." I stared at her. "Then how exactly do we get upstairs in an office?" She looked at the fire exit plan on the wall. By not using the route it expects. That was when I noticed the plan. The little laminated evacuation map beside the brochure rack, only it wasn't right. The red arrow marked, "You are here in reception," yes. But the upstairs admin office had been relabeled. Not admin, review. And the warehouse access route had a new notation in small printed text. "Threshold clearance required." I said, "Margaret." She saw it, swore once. David said, "It's using the building's own compliance signage." Of course it was. The office had found health and safety and decided to weaponize it. Margaret took the map off the wall entirely. Good. I looked at her. How is that good? Because if it's editing posted instructions, it still needs them visible. She folded the map in half and shoved it into her coat. "Remove the signage. Slow the process." I almost laughed. "You're fighting a haunting by stealing evacuation notices." "Yes," she said. "Keep up." We moved into the inner corridor. The lights here were motion sensor and should have come on section by section. Instead, all of them came on at once. Too welcoming. The accounts office door stood open. Inside, desks. Filing trays, invoice folders, someone's mug with world's okayest salesman on it. Normal. The meeting room opposite was dark, glass panel in the door, whiteboard beyond. And on the whiteboard, written in blue marker in neat block capitals, Continuity Review, 2100. Attendees expected. Underneath 3 tick boxes, one already marked. David Harrow. I stopped dead. No. David looked at it and went pale. I haven't done anything. Margaret said, No, but it has. I said, How is he already ticked in? David answered before she could. Threshold entry. I looked at him. What? He glanced at the front door behind us. I crossed the property line. That landed badly. Not full attendance, not sign in, but enough to register him as present to the site. Margaret muttered, Damn. I said, Can it tick me in too? She looked at the board. Not yet. Why not? Because witness requires acknowledgement. That was somehow worse. The board marker lifted by itself, no hand, no flourish. Just the marker rising from the tray and touching the whiteboard. Slowly, carefully, it drew a line through the second box. Not a tick, a waiting stroke, half complete. Eleanor Harrow. I stepped back. Margaret said, Move! We moved. Past the meeting room, past accounts, to the back corridor where the stairs rose to admin and the fire door led through to the warehouse. The warehouse door stood shut. The little wired glass panel in it reflected only darkness. David stopped again. What? He looked at the door. Someone's on the other side. I raised the mirror. In the glass panel for 1 second I saw the warehouse beyond not as racking and stock, but as rows of shutter slats rising and falling like breathing metal. And standing between them, small and still, the child. Thomas. Or the part of him the office still used. He was not looking at us. He was looking up, toward the stairs, as if waiting to see who chose review. I lowered the mirror. Warehouse can wait. Margaret nodded. Yes. The stairs, then. Standard office stairs, grey carpet tiles, metal handrail, framed safety poster halfway up. Only the poster had changed too. Not report all hazards immediately. Now it read, All errors must be escalated. I said, I'm going to set fire to every sign in this building. Margaret said, Later. We climbed. Halfway up, David stopped so suddenly I nearly hit him. What now? He looked up toward the landing. His face had gone flat with concentration. The file's open. My mouth went dry. How do you know? He didn't answer, then quietly. And it's not alone. We reached the top landing. The admin office door stood open. Light inside. Printer humming. Computer screens on. Ordinary enough at first glance. Then I saw the desks. Every in-tray had been emptied and sorted into 3 piles. Active, deferred, returned. And on the central desk, laid neatly under a green folder with typed label facing upward, sat a black fountain pen. The label read HVP/Site Transfer Authority. And in the chair behind the desk, hands folded, waiting as if she had every right in the world to be there, sat Helen Vale. Helen looked exactly as she had in the house. That was the first insult. No flickering corpse, no dramatic decay, no mercy of obvious wrongness. Just a dry older woman in a cardigan, seated behind a desk as if she had every contractual right to be there, and was mildly disappointed by the lateness of the attendees. The admin office lights hummed overhead, computer screens glowed. The printer in the corner ticked softly to itself like something waiting for a command. And on the desk between us sat the green folder and the black fountain pen. I hated the pen on sight. Helen folded her hands over the desk blotter and looked at me first. Eleanor, then at David, Mr. Harrow. Then, finally, at Margaret. Still arriving after the paperwork. Margaret did not step into the room. Good. Neither did I. David had gone very still beside me. Too still. Helen noticed. Of course she did. You needn't stand in the corridor, she said to him. You're already expected, Margaret said sharply. No! Helen smiled without warmth. Margaret, if I wanted his feet rather than his hand, we'd be having a different evening. That sentence hit exactly where it meant to. David's marked hand twitched once at his side. I saw it. So did Margaret. She said very quietly, Mr. Harrow, put that hand in your pocket. He did, immediately. Good. Helen's smile thinned, still trainable, encouraging. I said, What do you want? Helen looked at me with the sort of patience people reserve for children and junior staff. Want is such a sentimental word. We're here to complete a transfer review. No. She inclined her head slightly. Objection noted. That made my skin crawl. I looked at the green folder. What does the Site Transfer Authority do? Helen rested one hand lightly on it. It formalises continuity when an older site becomes unstable. Margaret said, by moving process into a modern entity without resolving the original debt. Helen glanced at her. Yes. Efficient, isn't it? I said, You mean it lets the office leave the house? Helen looked at me. Not leave. Expand. Worse. Much worse. She tapped the folder once. The house is compromised. The hotel is temporary overflow. The business, however, is ideal. David gave a short, humourless breath. Because we sell controlled entry. Helen turned her head toward him. Because you understand access, liability, and lawful transfer. The shutters are merely aesthetic. That was offensive in a way I respected. I said, And what happens if this goes through? Helen answered immediately. The company becomes an active threshold site, Margaret added coldly, with review authority retained upstairs and witness dependency attached to Eleanor. I looked at both of them. In English, Helen obliged. In English, your office becomes a place where the dead can be sorted, redirected, and formally moved through modern systems. Contracts, site visits, access permissions, handovers, closures. I felt sick. Not because it was abstract. Because it wasn't. I could see it at once. Engineers attending sites that should have stayed shut. Call-outs to properties with the wrong history. Locks opening where they shouldn't. Shutters closing on the wrong side of a threshold. A business becoming a machine for administrative haunting. I said, no. Helen gave the smallest shrug. Then we'll note refusal and proceed by pressure. Margaret said, not if the signatory refuses. Helen looked at David. He's already halfway there. David's jaw tightened. I'm not signing anything. Helen's expression did not change. No, she said, not willingly. That's why we prepared the hand. I looked at him. He looked at the pen. Then away from it, fast. Good. Margaret said, what's the deadline? Helen smiled. At last. A practical question. She lifted one finger and pointed toward the wall clock above the filing cabinets. 2057. By 9, she said, the review must either be completed, deferred with authority, or broken in a way that produces a new cost. There it was. Always the same shape in the end. Not escape, cost. I said, what kind of cost? Helen looked at me. That depends what you choose to preserve, Margaret muttered. She means she'll make us pay somewhere else. Helen did not deny it, I said. What exactly needs to happen by 9? Helen opened the green folder. Not fully. Just enough for us to see the top page. Typed form. Company header. Site reference fields. Signature blocks at the bottom. And in the top right corner, stamped in red, Transfer authority pending execution. My mouth went dry. Helen said, the signatory confirms site viability. The witness acknowledges continuity. The threshold is either present or lawfully deferred. Process completes. I stared at the page. 3 rolls again. Always 3. David said, and if one is missing? Helen looked at him. Then the review remains unstable. Margaret said, which is why she named Elise in the meeting invite. Helen smiled. Yes. I said, she isn't here. No, Helen said, but she may still be represented. That landed badly. I said, how? Helen's eyes flicked to the printer. At once it started. Paper feeding through with that dry mechanical confidence only office equipment can manage. No one moved. The printer spat out one page, then another, then another. Helen did not look at it. She didn't need to. Margaret crossed the threshold of the room by half a pace and snatched the top page from the output tray before the next one landed. Her face hardened. What? She handed it to me without letting the lower half tilt into view. I read the top lines. Remote threshold acknowledgement. Subject, Elise Aumont. Status, pending proxy confirmation. I looked up. Helen folded her hands again. The hotel remains active enough to provide adjacency. I wanted to hit her with the printer. Instead, I said, so you're trying to sign a lease in remotely? Not sign in, Helen said. Represent. David said, that's not lawful. Helen looked at him. Neither is half your industry, Mr. Harrow. Yet paperwork continues. That was so unpleasantly sharp I nearly admired it. Margaret said, you still need a live signatory. Helen's gaze returned to David's hand. Yes. The pen on the desk rolled half an inch toward the edge. No one touched it. David took one involuntary step back. Good. Then the admin office computer monitor woke. Not with a screensaver, with a document window already open. The title bar read, HVP Continuity Review Minutes. Underneath, typed in neat black text, 2055, witness arrived on site. 2056, review signatory, present at threshold. 2057, threshold representation pending. I felt the blood leave my face. It was doing exactly what the calendar invite had promised. Minuting the meeting before it happened, Helen said almost kindly, you see, we're already underway. Margaret said, no, you're drafting. Helen looked at her. Aren't all meetings? I said, how do we stop it? Margaret answered before Helen could. Break a dependency. Yes, Helen said. If you can identify one I haven't already accounted for. David looked at the desk, then at the printer, then at the filing cabinets. His face changed, not fear, work. I knew that look. I'd seen it in him years ago when a claim didn't add up and he'd started pulling at the edges until the whole thing came apart. He said, this isn't the original authority. Helen's eyes shifted to him. Interesting, Margaret noticed too. What? David pointed with his clean hand at the green folder. The paper stock's wrong. I looked at him. What? He didn't take his eyes off the file. HVP changed supplier last year. That header stock is old, pre-merger print run. Helen said nothing. That was enough. David went on, more certain now. And the site code format is outdated. We don't use that numbering sequence anymore. Margaret's face sharpened. Meaning? He looked at her. It's not using the live authority. I felt something crack open. Then what is it using? David answered immediately. A historical template. Helen's expression cooled by a degree. There, a mistake. A real one. Margaret said, can it execute transfer on an obsolete form? Helen answered before David could. If continuity is recognized, yes. David shook his head. No. She looked at him. No? No, he said. Not in the current business structure. That form references a site classification we retired. It can't complete under present authority without a current premises code. Silence. Then Margaret smiled for the first time that night. A terrible sight. Well done. Helen's gaze sharpened. Technicalities. David looked at her with open dislike. Yes, he said. That's how systems fail. That was the most attractive thing he had ever said, and I deeply resented the timing. I said, so it needs a current code. David nodded. Yes. Margaret said, and where would that be held? He answered at once. Warehouse access board, ground floor, live site map, and current premises register. Of course. Threshold below, review above. Authority dependent on current site classification. Modern business logic. Same old trap. Helen said, You won't reach it in time. Margaret looked at the clock. 20:58. 1 minute, I said. Then we don't need to reach it. Both of them looked at me. I looked at the computer screen. At the minutes already drafting themselves. At the printer. At the old template. And then I understood. Witness acknowledgement, I said. Margaret's eyes narrowed. What? Helen's expression changed slightly. Good. I said, you said the witness has to acknowledge continuity. Helen said nothing. I went on. And you've already counted David by threshold entry. You're trying to represent Elise remotely, but you still haven't got me. Margaret understood first. Of course she did. Her face sharpened. No acknowledgement. I nodded. No acknowledgement. Helen said very calmly, you're already in the room. I looked at her. Yes, and I still haven't agreed to what this is. The printer spat out another page. This one slower. As if listening, I stepped to the side of the desk, keeping my eyes off the lower half of the authority form. Then I looked directly at the monitor displaying the minutes and said, as clearly and coldly as I could, this is not a continuity review. This is an unauthorized attempt to formalise transfer using obsolete authority and false attendance. The room changed, not violently, procedurally. The printer stopped. The monitor flickered. The wall clock stalled for 1 second. Helen stood up. For the first time, she looked angry. Not theatrical anger. Administrative anger. The fury of a process challenged in the correct language. Margaret said very quietly, again. So I did. Louder. This meeting is not recognised. The monitor blinked. The typed minutes shivered. And on the desk, the black fountain pen rolled hard enough to hit the floor. At the same moment, somewhere below us in the warehouse, metal shutters began to rise. The sound from below was unmistakable. Metal shutters rising, not one. Several. The warehouse beneath us waking up in sections. Anyone who's spent time around industrial units knows that sound. The heavy mechanical drag, the chain tension, the rolling lift of slats giving way to height. Usually it means business is starting. Tonight it meant something much worse. Helen did not look at the floor. That told me enough. She had expected resistance upstairs. She had prepared for movement below. Margaret said, go. I didn't need clarification. Neither did David. We turned for the stairs at the same time. Behind us, Helen said, calm again now because systems recover quickly when they think they still have options. You're only moving the problem, Margaret answered without looking back. Yes, that's called surviving. We hit the stairs fast. The safety poster halfway down now read, threshold open. I didn't stop to appreciate the style. At the bottom landing, the wired glass warehouse door stood half open, warm industrial light spilling through into the corridor. Not dark archive light this time. Bright, practical, workmanlike illumination. That was worse. The office had stopped pretending to be old. It had adapted. David grabbed the rail and stopped dead 1 step above the floor. What? He looked at the warehouse door. It's live. In English. It's processing. Good. Excellent. Margaret came down behind us and shoved the warehouse door fully open with the heel of her hand. The warehouse beyond should have been simple. Racking, stock, shutter components, boxed motors, pallets, workbench, site plans on the wall. The usual practical mess of a business that actually does things. Most of that was still there. Which was the problem? Because threaded through it now was order. Too much order. The central aisle had been cleared. Pallets pushed back into exact lines. The workbench lit by the articulated lamp. The live site board at the far end illuminated under a strip light that should not have been on. And overhead, one of the internal roller shutters, the demonstration unit used for testing, was cycling slowly up and down by itself. Open, close, like a lung or a gate, or a decision that had not yet settled. I said no. David said at the same time, there. He pointed to the live site board. Pinned maps, coded premises list, engineer rota, active access notes, current premises register, the dependency, the current code. The thing Helen needed to update the obsolete authority. Margaret saw it too. Get the register! We moved. Then the warehouse tannoy crackled. No one had touched it. A burst of static, then a voice. Not Helen, not Thomas, not even the flat office voice from room 14. This one was male, older, tired, formal in the way men become formal when they've spent too many years inside rules they no longer believe in. Site review resumed, it said. Please remain within your designated lanes. I stopped dead. David went white. Margaret swore, and I said, Who is that? No one answered, because no one knew, or because someone did and didn't want to say. The central aisle floor had been marked with yellow warehouse tape for years. Safety lines, loading zones, pedestrian routes. Tonight the tape had changed, not physically, not exactly, functionally. The left lane now seemed to pull the eye toward the sightboard, the right lane toward the demonstration shutter, and down the middle between them stood a small figure in blue pyjamas. Thomas. He looked younger under warehouse light, smaller, more ordinary, more wrong. He wasn't looking at us, he was looking at the board, waiting. Margaret said, Do not step into the centre lane. I said, Why? Because it's the assigned route. David said, low and tight, She's right. I looked at him. How do you know? He didn't blink. Because it's mine. That landed hard. Review signatory. Assigned hand. The middle route. Straight to the board and whatever waited beyond it. I said, Then don't take it. He gave me a look. Excellent suggestion. The tannoy crackled again. Review signatory present. Witness present. Threshold pending. I looked up at the speaker mounted over the roller shutter. Can it stop narrating? No, Margaret said. It likes hearing itself formalised. Of course it did. Thomas lifted one hand and pointed to the left lane. Not at me. At the board. Then he pointed to the right lane. At the demonstration shutter. Then, finally, at David. The middle. I said, No. Thomas looked at me. Not angry, not sad, just patient. You have to put things back, Margaret said. Not like this. He turned his head toward her. You left it open. That hit. I saw it land in Margaret's face, even if she tried to hide it. I said, What did he mean upstairs? Margaret didn't answer, David did. He means she left after the first transfer failed. I looked at him. He kept his eyes on Thomas. Didn't you? Margaret's voice was flat now. Yes. No one had time to unpack that. The demonstration shutter slammed down hard enough to shake the warehouse. Elise's company logo on the side panel flashed in the moving light. Then the shutter rose halfway and stopped. A perfect threshold, not open, not closed, waiting. The tannoy said, Threshold route available. David's marked hand twitched violently. He grabbed his own wrist with the other hand. I moved toward him. Margaret snapped, No! I stopped. What? If you steady him now, you may be counted as witness support. I stared at her. You cannot possibly mean that. She looked at me. I absolutely do. David was breathing hard now, eyes fixed not on the board but on the shutter. The assigned route pulling. The threshold route waiting. The whole warehouse arranged like a process map. I said, David? He answered through his teeth, I know. Can you fight it? Yes. A beat. Probably. Not ideal, Thomas said almost gently. It's easier if you stand where you're meant to. That was the real danger again. Not threat. Relief. The promise that if you just moved into the right place, the pressure would stop. I looked at the sightboard. Current premises register pinned under a magnetic clip. Site codes. Access categories. Active locations. If we got that, Helen's obsolete form stayed obsolete. If we didn't, the office had what it needed. I said, I'm going left. Margaret nodded once. Good. David said, No. I looked at him. Why? Because if you touch the board as witness, it may count as acknowledgement of current structure. That made horrible sense. I said, Then who? He looked at the board, then at his hand, then at Thomas. And I knew before he said it. Me. No. Yes, Margaret said at the same time. Maybe. I rounded on her. Maybe. She looked at David. If he takes the left lane instead of the centre, and if he reaches only for the register, and if he does not touch any signing surface. That is too many ifs. Yes, she said. Welcome to the evening. The tannoy crackled. Review signatory delayed. Escalation available. The demonstration shutter rose another foot. Behind it, not the loading bay wall as it should have been, but darkness. Not empty darkness. Structured darkness. Depth where there should have been brick. The warehouse had opened a second threshold. David saw it too. His face changed. It's making a route, Thomas nodded once. Yes? I said, for what? He looked at me. For where he belongs. Number. Absolutely not. David took one step forward. Not into the centre lane, toward the left. Good. Then his hand jerked hard right. His whole body twisted with it. The pull was visible now. Not supernatural spectacle, just a man suddenly fighting his own arm as if some old training in him had been given the wrong command. He swore. Margaret moved fast, uncoiling the red cord from her case and throwing one end to me. Wrap the wrist! I caught it. For one stupid second I almost laughed, because of course this is what my life had become. Binding my ex-husband's haunted signing hand in a security warehouse while a dead child supervised lane discipline. Then I moved. Not to steady him. To the wrist only. Margaret looped the cord once around his forearm while I caught the other end and pulled tight. David hissed through his teeth. Sorry, I said. No, you're not. No, I said. Fair. The red cord tightened. The hand stopped pulling for 1 second. Then the tannoy said with mild disapproval, Manual override detected. And every warehouse light went out except 3. One over the sightboard, one over the half-open shutter, and one directly above David, spotlit, assigned. Thomas looked up at him and said with the tired patience of a child repeating instructions to adults who never listen, You can't take the board, you have to take the cost. Silence. Then Margaret said, very quietly, Oh no. I looked at her. What? She stared at Thomas. The register isn't the dependency. The whole warehouse seemed to tilt. I said, What do you mean? Margaret looked at David's bound hand, then at the half-open shutter, then at me. The current code was never the problem. The problem is, what updates it? I understood a second before I wanted to. No. David did too. His face went dead white. The tannoy answered for all of us. Review signatory required to authorise site transfer. The pen, not upstairs. Here now. A black fountain pen slid slowly across the workbench under the task lamp and came to rest beside the current premises register. Waiting. Thomas said almost kindly, If he signs here, the business lives. A beat. Then, and the house can close. There it was, the real trade. Not expansion, replacement. Move the office fully into the business and the old house, the old room, the old debt architecture, and could shut. Clean, modern, contained. I looked at David. He looked at the pen, then at me, then at the darkness beyond the half-open shutter. And in that second I knew exactly what episode 9 was going to be. Not how to stop the haunting, how to choose where it lives. And the demonstration shutter began to rise all the way.